Welcome to Lake TV's Community Spotlight Show, brought to you by the great folks at COMC, Central Ozarks Medical Center, where your health is their mission. And we've got a guest this week who is so cool. I have so much fun every time I sit down with Alan Sullivan. And Alan, I mean, you wear so many hats. It's pretty impressive. You worked for Ameren. You were the guy that controlled the level of the lake, when you were there. You run the Crossover Christian Music Festival, which has been running at the Lake of the Ozarks at the amphitheater year after year, and such a wonderful thing. But we got to talking, and you were kind of telling me a little bit about your family, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we got to talk about that too. So you were telling me that a couple of members of your family were a part of building the dam, right?
Right. My grandfather and then his son, who was 17 years old at the time, went to Sunday night church in Tuscumbia, Missouri. It's a little tiny church. It's still there. I grew up there.
Really?
And the preacher said, if any of you guys are looking for a job, they're hiring up at that new dam they're building. And as the country was sliding into the Great Depression, everybody was looking for jobs. People came from all over the world to work here because there was a major workforce to be hired here, and they ended up hiring over 20,000 workers. My grandfather and my uncle were two of those, and my uncle had to lie about his age because you're supposed to be 18, but he used to say, but I was 18 that day.
How old was he really?
He was 17.
Really?
It was about 6 months before he would turn 18. But so when they learned about the job openings in church, they got on their horses and rode through the night. And he said they got to he called it the hiring shack, and got in line before daylight. And he said by the time daylight came, you couldn't even see the end of the line.
Wow.
All the guys lining up to get jobs. And some of these people had traveled miles and miles and miles and miles and miles, and maybe spent the last little bit of income they had to travel here, hoping they would get work.
And that was like in 1929, right?
It was in August of 1929. And the cool thing is they stood in line. And Chris, if I was standing in that line and you were desperate for a job and you came up and I'd say, well, just get in line with me, we'll get a job together. Well, the guys behind me would say no, because you might get my job, and fights would break out in the line where people used to fight to get a job. And so that happened in front of my grandfather, and he was a very honorable man, and he just stepped out of line. Well, my 17-year-old uncle was bullheaded enough, he stayed in the line, but the hiring boss saw my grandfather step out of line, bypassed a whole lot of guys, and he said, do you good men want a job? And he said, if you give my boy one too, and he said, bring him and we'll hire you. And they were the last two guys that day hired for 35 cents an hour, thought they were dog rich, and everybody else had to wait till the next day till they hired again.
Wow.
So that's how they got their jobs.
35 cents an hour. That's more than we make here at Lake TV. I mean, that's good money.
Yeah, that is. That's better than TV broadcasters, isn't it?
Okay, so we're talking 1929. What did it's your grandfather and your uncle?
Yes.
Okay, what did they do before the dam?
Well, they were farmers
Okay.
in Tuscumbia, and they did plow horse work farming, and were looking forward to being able to afford mechanized equipment. Yeah. So this job working at the dam, and eventually they made more money than as they did different things, but they were just good farmers, had the big crosscut saws, and so their first job was clearing land under the lake.
Okay.
Now, unlike the government lakes like Truman Lake, Corps of Engineers Lake, the government does not clear the trees, but Ameren, our Union Electric Company at the time, wanted the trees cut that would stick out of the water at the lowest lake level. Now, people don't realize that the minimum lake level at that time was 630 elevation, which is a 30-foot drawdown of the lake. Imagine if that ever happened today. But if a tree would stick out of the water at the minimum lake level, they cut it down, burned most of them, tied some down, and that's what they did all day long with crosscut saws for 35 cents an hour, is cut trees and Get them on the ground.
That's a whole lot of tree cutting. I
That
mean,
was a
if you've
lot.
ever been to Missouri, Lake of the Ozarks, there's trees everywhere. So they had to, 630 feet above sea level, they had to cut the trees off at that level because that's as low as the lake is ever supposed to get.
They dropped the whole tree to the ground if it would stick above that level.
Oh, they would.
I'm
They
sure
take the whole tree down.
I'm sure the surveyors marked trees that needed to be cut. And later they had a better paying job of $4 a day. They brought a team of horses from the family farm in Tuscumbia, and to build the dam, they had to build big temporary structures with sheet pilings that would be driven into the ground. They call them coffer dams because the river had to be diverted in order to build the dam across the dry riverbed. And those sheet pilings came up the river on steamboats, and they'd be offloaded by these guys with horses. And they would put a hook in them and drag them 4 miles up the riverbank, and they got $4 a day for the man and $4 a day for the horse.
Really?
I don't think the horse ever got his $4.
I'm guessing not. Wow, and everything had to be done manually. I mean, back in those, they didn't have a whole lot of mechanized stuff to help out.
Well, can you imagine trying to coordinate 5,000 workers at the peak of construction at the dam site? And over 20,000 people were hired through the 2-year project, but 5,000 at one time, without radios, without computers. It was the superintendent telling his yard foreman, who told their workers to make it happen. And then all the purchasing people, and when you could send an email to get immediate response, you'd send a letter and make orders. And to get all that done on a 2-year schedule, it was
kind of miraculous.
It really was.
Yeah.
And my uncle would tell me that they had a sign on the job that said, if you don't work in the bad weather, you don't get to work in the good weather either. So they had to work no matter what. And the cold winters, winter of 1929, my uncle said you could ride your horses across the river because it froze over. So they could ride. They stayed on Duckhead Point, which is owned by Central Bank now. And there was an old cabin there. And my uncle said that the farmer kept his hogs under the house, and they would be bumping and squealing on the floor joists all night long. He said it's hard to get a night's sleep. But that's where they rented to stay during the week while they were working.
Wow, amazing. Okay, so we're talking with Alan Sullivan. His family, a huge part of the lake and the growth of the lake and the dam and all that. We'll have more with Alan right after this. If you love the lake, you gotta love Lake TV. At COMC, your health is our mission. Central Ozarks Medical Center is growing in our community with a new dental location to serve you in Eldon and a new location in Loring. COMC also makes your children a priority with a mobile dental unit serving schools in rural areas where access can be a challenge. COMC also offers OBGYN, sports medicine, pediatric, and behavioral health care. Get more info on how COMC can help you at centralozarks.org. COMC, where your health is our mission. If it's happening at the lake, it's happening on Lake TV. From the polar plunge to festivals, parades, aquapalooza, and boat shows, Lake TV has it all. Even the granddaddy of them all, the shootouts. If you're looking for places to party, things to do, or even a new home to move into, you've gotta love Lake TV. Welcome back to Lake TV's Community Spotlight Show, brought to you by the great folks at COMC, Central Ozarks Medical Center. So, talking with good friend Alan Sullivan here, kind of your family has so much history here at the lake. You were telling us in the first segment that your grandfather and your uncle from Tuscumbia rode all night to get a job, to be a part of the crew that built the dam, right? And so what were the first jobs that they had to do for 35 cents a day?
35 cents an hour.
An hour, okay.
Yes, 35, and they thought they were rich.
Oh, yeah.
Because nobody had any job and they were glad to get anything. But they had cross-cut saws they brought from the farm, the old 2-man crosscut saws.
Yeah. Did they work together as a
They
team?
worked together,
Okay.
and they cut trees in the bottom of the lake. There would be the lake that would protrude above the water surface when the lake was drawn down its maximum amount, which at that time was a 30-foot drawdown of the lake from full. So naturally, we don't draw down that low now.
Let's hope.
But yes.
That would hurt a lot of docks.
But that was their first job, and later on they brought a team of horses and drug sheep pilings from the riverboat at Bagnell, Missouri, 4 miles up the riverbank to build the coffer dams, which are temporary dams to divert the river.
Right, so that they could build the dam, right.
Yes.
Did they stick around after the dam was built?
After the dam was completed, they went back to the farm and took their same crosscut saws and brought in a portable sawmill to the farm in Tuscumbia and sawed trees. And of course, at that time, you build your barn first, which they did, build a barn. And I still have some of the wood from that barn that was just a few years ago blew over in a storm. And then they built a house. So they stayed working and stayed sawing, but yeah, they did not stay working for the project after it was completed.
Right, but they stayed in the area, and you stayed in the area, right? Because you grew up in Tuscumbia, I think?
I did, yes. Yeah. I graduated in 1971 from Tuscumbia High School.
Right.
So I just told my age.
I know. And 1971 doesn't seem that long ago,
No, it doesn't.
Unless you start adding it up. And so, kind of a chip off the old block. So your granddad and your uncle helped build the dam. Then you worked for Ameren in later years, and you kind of were in charge of controlling the water level.
Well, that was, I had a job for 41 years at the dam. Very blessed to have that. Work with people way smarter than me.
Right.
But lake level control had to do with scheduling power. So we would look at a number of things like how much water was being released from Truman Dam, how much water was running in, we call it local runoff, the need for electricity generation, and then conditions downstream, all those factors in the weather forecasts, and we would schedule amount of electricity then, which would determine the amount of water released, which also determine lake levels.
There's a lot that goes into that.
There's a lot that goes into that.
And a lot of people were, I'm sure you heard some, hey, why are you doing this? Why, and all that stuff, but you can't make everybody happy all the time.
There was one day I got a complaint that the lake was too high and too low in the same day. and so we recognize lake levels are very critical to both people upstream and downstream, because the downstream people are concerned about flooding their farms as well. Yeah. And so we tried to weigh heavily, and we never take those decisions lightly.
Right, absolutely. So we're talking with Alan Sullivan. So you are involved in so much. I mean, your family helped build the dam. You worked for Ameren, you controlled lake levels. You also are a part of the Crossover Christian Music Festival at the Lake of the Ozarks every year out at the amphitheater. You did the On the Beach Sunday service at Captain Ron's for many, many years. So, I mean, really, you're kind of entrenched into the lake community.
Well, I love this community, and growing up here and growing around the lake, spent a lot of time raising my kids behind a boat on the lake, and we've done lots of skiing and did a little bit of competitive skiing at one time. So we've just really enjoyed lake living, and it's just a beautiful place to live, to work, and to grow up.
Absolutely. Now, we only have a minute left, but real quickly, you actually have some water skiing records, right? What kind of records?
In 1979, we had a water ski marathon for muscular dystrophy to raise money. In 1979, we raised $11,000 on a Saturday, and myself and another guy, Brad, skied 289 miles, different boats. We were competing against each other as we found out the other one was still going on a Saturday. And as far as I know, that's a Saturday record on the Lake of the Ozarks.
How much? 289?
289. We skied from the dam to Pier 31, gassed up the boats, skied back to the dam all day long.
Wow. Wow. I'd still be sore from that, from 1971.
It took me a while to get over that.
All right, Alan, man, what a blessing. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for everything you and your family have done for the lake. It wouldn't be the same without you guys.
Well, thank you very much. My pleasure.
So that's Alan Sullivan, also the director of the Crossover Christian Music Festival. So thank you for joining us for Lake TV's Community Spotlight Show.